In 2014, a man called Ronald James Reed in Vermont, the US, died. He was in his 90s. Nothing particular about it, nothing strange about that. The only thing that was out of the ordinary is the fact that he donated a couple of $1 million to the hospital that took care of him and to the library that he was visiting often. So when people looked at his accounts, they realized that this man died a multimillionaire, and his net worth was about $8 million. Oh, because I forgot to mention, he worked all his life as a gas station attendant and as a janitor. Hello to the 5 people watching, welcome back to the channel. My name is Alin. I like making videos on a bunch of topics, and today I'm going to talk about one of my favorite stories. And this is the story of a man who was born at a farm in Vermont in a very tiny house. He had to walk to school 4 miles every day, which is about 6.4 kilometers. Not someone you would expect to become a multimillionaire throughout his lifetime. He was old enough to go to war. He enrolled and he was sent off in Europe and also the Pacific in the Second World War, and then he was discharged in 1945. He came back to the States and he started working as a gas station attendant, and he had that job for 25 years. And then he retired for about a year or so. I'm not sure why, but then he picked up a job as a part-time janitor. It's unclear why, but probably he was bored, I would say. And he managed to accumulate a considerable wealth. Well, how did he do it? Discipline, focus, by being frugal, by living below his means. That's how he did it. He invested religiously for decades. He invested in blue chips stocks. He would invest in companies like General Electric, like Procter & Gamble. If I find some information about what companies he invested in specifically, I'll link it in, I'll put it somewhere here. He did not invest in technology because he didn't understand it. Very similar in that way with Warren Buffett and Charlie Munger. He focused on dividend-paying stocks, and he held those stocks for decades, and I mean decades. All the dividends he received were reinvested back into acquiring even more stock. By the time of his death, he had acquired about 95 different stocks, and he was diversified across a bunch of sectors like healthcare, telecommunications, like public transport, like consumer goods. By the way, if you remember the 2008 crisis, financial crisis, you're old enough to remember it, he also had Lehman Brothers stock. He lived long enough to go through that crisis, and he obviously lost. He took a loss there, but it was a insignificant loss compared to the rest of his portfolio because he was very well diversified. Not only that, but I'm curious how many of you know. I think I used to know, not sure. Ages ago, decades ago, when you would buy stock of a company, you would receive a piece of paper that would confirm your ownership of that stock. That's how it used to be. And Ronald kept those sheets in a bank deposit box. And there were so many of them that apparently when you put them all and you stack them all on top of each other, they were about 5 inches tall, which is quite a bit, which is about 12.5 centimeters in metric. So that means he had to basically have it written down somewhere, the amount of shares he had in a company. I assume, I'm not entirely sure, because what he would do, because he would read the Wall Street Journal and another newspaper called Barron's, where he would regularly check the performance of his portfolio. Let's talk about his frugality, which I think is important to mention. Apparently he was very frugal with a lot of things in his life. He went so far that apparently he used a safety pin when his denim jacket was basically falling apart. And he didn't pay much attention to the way he dressed. He didn't care about it. He used to go to a chain restaurant to eat, and one of the customers there looked at him and they paid for his meal because they thought he couldn't afford it, which I find amusing. He also drove a second-hand car. He drove a Toyota Yaris, and according to his lawyer, he would park far enough in those parking spots that did not have a parking meter, so he didn't have to pay. A lot of people would say that he took frugality too far. He didn't enjoy his money. You'll find those opinions, especially if you go on Reddit. I don't agree entirely. Maybe he did. But you have to think about something. There's a bit of a misconception here. His stepchildren, his kids, his wife's kids, he paid for their college. So yeah, of course, I'm sure it was in a time when college was not even close as expensive now, but still. He also became a part-time janitor, which is another misconception. You will hear a lot of when you will hear a story about this guy, you will see, oh, this janitor became a multimillionaire. Well, it's not entirely correct. He went back to work. This is speculation, it's only my opinion. Probably because he was bored after taking a year off from his previous job. But he only took a part-time job as a janitor, which I think it's worth mentioning. So surely he did use some of that portfolio. I don't think he was that crazy frugal. He was frugal. Very interesting about his story is that everybody was shocked when he died and when it became apparent that how much money he had amassed over the decades, and that includes his own kids. I find that really interesting. To not tell anyone, people were not aware. Nobody was, not his neighbors, not his kids, nobody. He donated millions of dollars to the hospital that took care of him in the latter stages of his life. That hospital, they built an expansion with basically money that came from Ronald and named that wing of the hospital after him, which is nice. He donated, I think it was about $4 million to the hospital and to the library that he was visiting. It took me a while. I think it took me maybe 2 years. I think it was about 2016 when I heard about him. By mistake, I don't remember where I was reading. I found out about his story and I found it very inspiring. And it was one of those stories that made me think about what I want to do with my life and what steps should I take and what direction should I go. And it wasn't the only one, but it was definitely a very important one that led to me starting my own investing journey. And I come back to the story every once in a while and I read it because I think it's important, because it reminds me of how important it is to keep things simple, keep DCAing, keep buying, keep your discipline, and you'll see results over time, over decades. I know it's boring, but it's how it is. Well, I think that's it for today. I think this is the episode for this week. I hope you found that story interesting, and let me know down below, because I'm curious if you're an investor. How did you start investing? Why? What made you take that first step out of curiosity? Take care. Bye bye. I'll see you next week.